Good morning, everybody. So this is the second class in a short series on the Gradual Path or Lam Rim series in Tibetan Buddhism. And I thought I'd talk today a little bit about some initial topics of setting out in the path. One of the biggest challenges in learning to meditate is that we usually don't appreciate the magnitude of the task. Transforming the mind takes time. It's not something that you're going to master in a few months or even a few years, but it is completely possible to begin the journey and notice positive changes right away. Buddhism posits that the road to enlightenment is a journey of many lifetimes. Eons, it is said. One story in the sutras speaks of a crow flying around a mountain, brushing it with a silk scarf in his beak. As the scarf touches the mountain, very slowly, it sands down the mountain. The time it takes the crow to sand the mountain down to nothing is the time it is said to take in order to reach enlightenment. Does this discourage you? Our modern technological culture conditions us to have push-button happiness and instant results. But this is only fleeting happiness, not true lasting happiness. Realizing our spiritual potential takes time, but it's totally possible to accomplish the task of eliminating all the internal obstacles and negativities from the mind. We need to accumulate a vast amount of virtuous karma or merit, which ripens the mind to full awakening. Here, it is helpful to review the concept of mind and rebirth. Buddha said that the mind has no beginning. Have you ever had a dream or a moment of deja vu when you have observed or realized things that you know you have a connection with, but there's no context for it in this life? Many years ago, shortly after I met my first Buddhist teacher, I had a dream one night that I was walking with other students along an underground river, following Venerable Thupten Chodron. It was dark, but then suddenly I emerged on a wide open plain, looking at a broad range of snow-covered mountains beneath a perfectly deep blue sky. The imagery was incredibly vivid and clear, and in that moment in the dream, I knew the mountains were the Himalayas. And yet I'd never been there at that point in this life. Several years later, I made the choice to go live in the foothills of those mountains, attending classes on Buddhist philosophy. Of course, that's not a proof of past lives. Maybe it was just a dream, but it felt more like a memory to me. I invite you to reflect on the possibility of past lives using your own logical reasoning. To do this analysis, you first need to distinguish between the brain and the mind and understand the concept of a continuum. The brain is part of the body and is form. The mind is formless. Body and mind are different continuums. The continuum is analogous to a river. There's no drop of water in the river that you can say, this is the river. The water keeps flowing, eventually to the ocean, and then evaporates to the clouds, and then falls again to earth, perhaps in the same river or a different one. River is just a concept created by language. In the novel Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, the Buddha attains enlightenment, observing the flow of the river and understanding the true nature of reality in this way. A continuum is just a word, a name that we give to something that moves through time, but which has no solid objective identity that you can point to. When I go hiking in the middle of summer, sometimes I stop by the edge of a river, bend over, scoop up a hatful of water, and pour it over my head. Did I just pour the river on my head? That doesn't really make sense because I would drown if I poured the entire Ho River on my head. So then you could argue, well, you just took a part of the river out to splash on your head. Okay, are there two rivers now? Or is every drop of water a river? Where does the concept river begin and end? Perhaps you think this is pointless mental gymnastics, but these kinds of investigations are what we need to undertake if we want to understand the nature of the mind and phenomena and how concepts shaped by language can both clarify and distort reality. Our present body in this moment isn't the same body we had a nanosecond ago, but it is part of the same continuum. It arises or results from the previous moment of body, and we can trace this all the way back to when we were teenagers, children, infants, to the fetus, and to the first moment when the sperm and egg came together. That's the origin of this body, the sperm and the egg, and all the rice, tofu, and vegetables we've eaten since then. But the mind has its own continuum, and it arises in the same way, from its previous moment. Of course, mind and body are connected and related within one lifetime, but they have different continuums. The present moment of mind arises due to the previous moment of mind. We can begin to see this in our moods and feelings. If we're feeling happy, that mind will influence the following mind moments until something arrives to change that feeling. If we trace the mental continuum backwards, we see that the mind of this moment is related to the mind we woke up with this morning, which is connected to the mind we had yesterday, the mind we had last week, last year, 5 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, the mind we had when we were a child, and all the way back to the mind at the moment of conception. However, that's where we need to ask the question, where did that first moment of mind arise from at the moment of conception? It can't come from the body because mind can't arise from body. It's a different continuum. Think also here about the very common experience of people having out-of-body experiences. And just a little warning, this is a little traumatic story, but once I attended a talk with Stephen and Andrea Levine, and someone in the audience shared his story. He was on his way to work, driving his truck, and he suddenly had to slam on his brakes for some reason. Unfortunately, the aluminum ladder on top of his truck wasn't secured and came loose, striking a pedestrian and instantly killing him. As he shared his story through tears, he spoke of how he immediately left his body and was with the person who was killed, high above the intersection, looking down at the scene of himself in the truck and the pedestrian lying on the pavement. So the mind and body are understood to be separate continuums that for the most part are connected during this life. And in answer to the question of where the first moment of mind of this life comes from, Buddhist philosophy says it comes from the previous moment of mind, which in this case would be the mind as it was just about to leave the intermediate state, or the bardo, that exists between the present life and the previous life. If we had perfect clairvoyance, we could continue tracing the mind back to the moment of death in our previous life, back to our previous life's birth, and infinitely backwards through infinite lives in various realms with no beginning to be found. Of course, it's normal to have doubts about this process, especially if it conflicts with pre-existing belief systems we may have. So please don't accept anything I say at face value, but use your innate intelligence and reasoning ability to investigate. And if you can't prove that previous lives don't exist, perhaps it would be wise to accept that they might exist and be open-minded. There are some interesting accounts of people who remember their previous lives. And then there's the situation where identical twins are born and yet have completely different personalities. So in order to make sense of the Buddhist framework of the path to enlightenment, it's important to consider the possibility that the past and future lives exist and that mind continues on at death. However, for the time being, it's okay just to set it all aside if it seems strange and threatening. You'll still benefit in this life by learning to meditate and following the basic teachings. So there's no way I can give a comprehensive presentation of the Buddhist path in an 11-week class, although I'll try my best to cover a few of the main points. The Lam Rim, or Gradual Path teachings, are the primary source that guides my meditation practice. So I just wanted to share my screen here for a second and show you some of the books that are out there for the Lam Rim. So here's the literal translation of the Lam Rim by Lama Tsongkhapa, and also a 5-volume set of commentary on the Lam Rim by Geshe Sopa. And something a little easier for beginners is Guided Meditations on the Stages of the Path by Thupten Chodron. It comes with a set of audio CDs. These are quite helpful. I often listen to them in my car when I'm on a trip. And Yangtze Rinpoche's book, Practicing the Path, which is a commentary again on the Lam Rim. It's a wonderful book, and I have several copies here if anybody would like to borrow one or make a donation for one. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's The Path to Enlightenment. I believe this is a commentary on one of the earlier Lam Rim teachings. And then online on lamayeshe.com, that's YESHE.com, there's meditation outlines on the Lam Rim, which are, I find, quite helpful to understand the overall structure of the Lam Rim. So if you go on a trip, you need to have a roadmap. I like to share about how in the old days I would study a paper map, and I remember driving over to Middlebury College or something for an interview back in around 1977. Going through back roads in New England, and you get to some place. Do I go left? Do I go right? Do I go straight? Wait, this can't be it. Turn around, back up. Today, of course, we've got Google Maps on our smartphones that tell us exactly where to go and even give us alternatives when real-time traffic data indicates a problem with a primary route. But even smartphones can get it wrong because nothing can truly keep up with change. And of course, our phone battery can die. And then there's other problems with technology. A few days ago, I dropped my daughter off at school in Bellingham, and there were students and traffic jams everywhere. I was trying to find my way back to the freeway, but Google kept taking me on a very strange route. Finally, I realized that the map was set to give directions for a bicycle. I was like, oh. So anyways, to follow the spiritual path, we need an inner map, something we've committed to memory that we can refer to at all times. The Buddhist path isn't linear, but spiral and holographic. We often travel the same section of the path many times before we finally understand a teaching, to the point where we no longer need to review it. But it's not like we then discard the teaching. It's incorporated into the rest of the map. It's also important to understand that we can't just jump into the path near the end, as many people today try to do with their fascination with Tantra. Tantra, in one sense, is just about learning how to manipulate your energy channels so that instead of our energy dispersed through the many branched channels of the body, everything is moving into the central channel and all the knots in the chakras are removed, which is actually one of the purposes of acupuncture. But it doesn't make any sense to practice these techniques unless they are guided by the foundational teachings, which is basically the entire Lam Rim. Tantra comes after the Lam Rim in the Lam Rim outline. To practice Tantra without understanding teachings on death and rebirth, karma, disadvantages of anger and attachment, and how to concentrate the mind and develop wisdom and so forth, is like piloting a rocket ship blind. You'll just end up in outer space somewhere completely lost, or perhaps crash and burn into the sun. There's an excellent online PDF, which I shared, and it has a detailed version and also a more of an outline. And the overall outline is defined by the three scopes: small, medium, and great. The three scopes aren't three separate paths. There are a few preliminary sections: the greatness of the authors, the greatness of the Dharma, how to listen and teach the Dharma. So Dharma is a term you'll hear a lot in Buddhism. Its most common usage, it simply refers to the teachings of Buddha. But in its Sanskrit etymology, it's something like cosmic law or universal truth. Probably the most important section in this initial kind of introductory part of the outline is how to rely on a spiritual guide. You often hear the word guru or lama, not only in Buddhism, but also in Hinduism and other traditions. So there are several different versions of the Lam Rim. The version by Lama Tsongkhapa, the Lam Rim Chenmo, was completed in 1402, long before the internet existed. Today, it's quite common for people to set themselves up as a guru on the internet. Perhaps somebody is a charismatic speaker and has a large following. But how do you know they are someone with your best interests in mind and not just pursuing their own ego agenda? It's important that we take our time in choosing a teacher and carefully examine their qualities. Guru devotion isn't actually required if one wishes to achieve the goals of the two lower scopes: gaining a fortunate rebirth in the next life or to achieve liberation. But if one wishes to practice Tantra, Guru devotion is considered essential. Traditionally, one is supposed to check out a teacher for 12 years before deciding that person is your guru. You need to make sure your teacher lives an ethical life, has a calm mind, can teach based on their own experience, is joyful, has extensive knowledge of the path, and ideally has realized emptiness, which I haven't. So I'll stop there for now.